Kakadosh, Boker Or, Masechet Zevachim Daf Yomi Daf Kuf Yudchet Amud Aleph 118a1. Remember, we're finishing this Masechet, right, in another 2 days because it finishes on Kuf Kaf. Okay, that's when we finish Masechet Zevachim. So we're starting with 118 on the top. We were just speaking about the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, right, where basically he's saying that even a Yachid, which is even an individual, is allowed to bring Korbanot Chova on a Bama Gdolah. Okay, but why? So how does he explain the pasuk of Isha Yasha Ben Avyase, which means that everyone has to do what's good in their eyes, and obviously that's talking about Nedarim Nedavot. Samalecha, he's going to tell you Kiktiva Yashar when it's written in Yashar Ben Dichtiv, right? What does that mean? Only to do the Bamak Tana. We're talking about right this halacha that it has to be either a neder or nedava. But by Bamak Gdola, afilu chovot nami likriv. Even the yachid could bring a korban chova, meaning by the Bama Gdola, it's not only going to be just Korbanot Tzibur, even a Korban of a Yachid, right? He's allowed to bring, right, the Korbanot Chova of a Yachid, he's going to bring on a Bama Gdola. Ela, but rather, Hakativ, it's written Ish, right? When it says the word Ish, what are we talking about? Lav Lamemra, we're not talking about the Ish Yisharotu Likrov, which means that we're talking about that the Yechidim are going to bring only the things which are Yashar, but Chovot they should not bring. So basically, what we're asking is again, Rabbi Yehuda says that the individual could bring a korban chova of the individual, right? Remember, we're talking about the individual. The individual is going to bring a korban chova, his own korban chova on a bama gdola. I thought it said it had to be yashar. And Isha Yashar Benav was always talking about things which are nidarim in the dvo, but it's good in your eyes. Anything which is good in your eyes, Yashar Benecha, is chayav liot neder or nedava. It cannot be anything else. So he says, Mi kiktiv ish. When it says ish, it's lachshir et azar. It's going to permit the zar to do the avodah in the bama ktana, which means the ish does not refer to a yachid. It's coming to include everybody, even if he's not a kohen. One more time, you have the word ish. Ish could include many things, but here what we're talking about is that the ish is not talking about that it's including, right, the avodah in a bama ktana. It's only including that even though he's not a kohen, he could do the service on a bama ktana. That's called the word ish. So says the Gemara, Zar, we learn it from somewhere else. From where? It says in the Pasuk, V'zarak HaKohen et Adam al Mizbach Hashem, that he's going to throw, right? The Kohen is going to come and throw the blood on the Mizbeach of Hashem, right? So he says, and Nafkan, that's where it comes from. So says the Gemara, Ma'u, the tema I would have thought to say, Libai Kiddush Bechorot Kemeikara, that we mean that they're going to bring the Bechorot, right, from the beginning. What does that mean? Before the Mishkan, who was the one that did the service? It was the Bechor. So therefore, since the Bechor was the one doing it, it would only be kosher in the Bechor, not an any person. Kamash comes teach you that when it says Ish, it doesn't even have to be a Bechor. Anybody. On a private barbecue, on a Bama Ktana, anybody is going to be kosher to do the service. So says the Gemara, V'chachamim, Hainu Tanakama then. So then the Chachamim are going to be like Tanakama. So Rav Papa says, no, the difference between them is going to be when they're going to bring the nisachim, the wine libations in the midbar. According to Shitat Chachamim, right, he says over here, Ladat Chachamim and Ishonim, they didn't bring them in the midbar. According to the Chachamim, the other ones, they did bring them in the midbar. So Amar More says, Rabbi Shimon says that even at Tzibur, they didn't bring only psachim or chovot, right, which the chovot were kavua zaman, which fixed time. My tamad Rabbi Shimon, what's reasoning Rabbi Shimon? Vayasu bnei Yisrael et Pesach ba'Gilgal, right? Bnei Yisrael came and they did the Pesach in the Gilgal. So says the Gemara, pshita, obviously they did the Pesach in the Gilgal. Well, why wouldn't they do it in the Gilgal? He says no. Ela Kamashmalan comes teach you the chovot ke'en Pesach udekarev. Only the chovot which are like the Korban Pesach they would bring because it has kavua zman. Halav, right? Ken Pesach, but if it's not like the Pesach, lo karev, it's not going to be brought. But the other tzad, what do they hold? He says, Mi bailech the Rabbi Yochanan. They need like Rabbi Yochanan. Dam Rabbi Yochanan says, Mishum Rabbi Bena'a, in the name of Rabbi Bena'a, Arel, right? Mekabel haza'ah. Do you know that a person that's going to be an Arel, right? What's an Arel? He still has the Orla, which means he did not do Bri Milah. So if he becomes Tameh, he still receives the haza'ah, the sprinkling of the paraduma, to become pure. That means they would come and they would still do What? No, he says it, right? So he says, right? He says that he's going to come and he's going to do the haza'ah to become pure. The Tani Tana Kameh de Ravada Barava. So they taught in the according to Ravada Barava. En ben bama gdola lebama ktana. There's no difference between a bama gdola and bama ktana. Ela Pesach lechovot hakvu lahem zman. Only Pesach and the chovot, the korban chovot, which are kavu zman. Elmaleh, he says, to targem matnitach, right? Explain the Braita. Beolat chova, deika olat nedava. Remember that there's such a thing as called an olat chova, and then there's olat nedava, right? So he says, right, dei chatat. But if you're going to tell me a chatat, he says chatat nedava. There's no such thing as a chatat nedava. Right? There's no such thing as a chatat nidava. Right? Remember, a nidava can never come as a chatat or a sham, because you cannot bring a sin offering to Hashem. You understand? It doesn't make sense. It's kilu, you're bringing a present to Hashem that you sinned against him. Obviously not. So the chatat or an asham can never come as a nidava. Velukme, so ask the Gemara b'minchat chuva. Why don't we just say it's a minchat chuva? Teika chavitin, you have the chavitin, which is also going to be an obligation. So says the Gemara, Kasavar, he holds en mincha bebama. There's no such thing as a mincha in the bama at all. Okay, fine. Nekuda. That's what we actually spoke about also before. We said the same thing. That there's no mincha. No, nothing to do. Right? He says like this. Baul Shiloh. Right? They came to Shiloh. So he says like this. Menane. You remember we said that in Shiloh there was no tikra. There was only a bet avanim. So he comes and he says, right, like this. He says, what's the reasoning, right? How do we know that there was a Mishkan in Shiloh? So Amar Rabbi Baraba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Baraba name Rabbi Yochanan. Katuv Echad Omer, one pasuk says, V'teviyu bet Hashem Shiloh. V'katuv Echad Omer, one of them says, V'yitosh Mishkan Shiloh, Oel Shikem Ba'adam. Uchtiv v'netzueter, V'yimas Ba'ol Yosef V'shevet Ephraim Lo Bachad. Right, what does that mean? From the two last psukim, it's mashma that the Mishkan in Shiloh was only an ohel. It wasn't a bite, right? So what's going on then? How do we explain it then? So he says, "Hakeitzad lo yashen tikra." It was like a house, but there was no tikra. There was no roof. El avanim milematan, v'yot milemalan. And on the top there was only curtains. V'hiaita menucha. That's the menucha which is written in the Torah. So therefore, that's what I mean. We called it a house, yeah, but it was without a roof. Okay, so then we said koche kodashim. Do you know that you were able to eat koche kodashim within the curtains, right? And the kadashim kalim, anybody that could see it. So menahan nimile, how do we know these words? The pasuk says Yisham lecha beta lelutecha bechol makom asher tireh, bechol makom asher tireh, any place where you could see the mishkan, iyata ma'aleh, you cannot come and bring the olot. Aval ata ochel, but you're allowed to eat, right? Bechol makom asher taroeh, any place where you see. Meaning, as long as you see the mishkan, you could eat over there. Right? Certain times when we had certain type of kochim or whatever, it had to be within the walls, within this. Here, you're looking at it. Right? You see it, you're allowed to do it. Okay? Says the Gemara. Okay? We're talking about right now the two dots. We're talking about, right? That the Koche Kodashim. Right? If you remember, we just said that since it says Bechol Makom Asher Tir'eh, Bechol Makom Asher Tir'eh, you could come and you could eat it. You can't bring the korban there, but you could eat it there. So Ema Bechol Makom Asher Taroeh Iyata Maleh Adal Tazoveach. Right? That means okay, fine. Maybe you can't bring it out of the korban, but you could do the shchita. So Rabbi Yana, he says, the pasuk says Sham Ta'aleh V'Sham Ta'aseh. There you're going to bring it up. There's a hekesh. Right? There's makish between aliyah, which is to bring it to the korban, and the asiyah, which is the shchita. But Rav Avdimi Bar Chasa, the pasuk actually says it. Kuv Yudchet Amubet, yeah, 118b. It says velo ta'anat Shiloh. Right? What does that mean? Makom shekol haroeh oto mitaneach alav. Right? Afterwards, it's going to be like after the churban of Mishkan Shiloh, you're going to be sighing. Right? You know what to sigh is, right? When a person is like, oh, you know, like they're sighing. Right? To sigh, S-I-A-G-H. Right? So he says, Ala chila kodshim shelo. Rabbi Avu comes and he says, the pasuk says, Ben porat Yosef, Ben porat ale'ayin. We just had that in last week's parasha. He says, what does that mean? Ayin, the ayin shel Yosef, shelo ratzta lizom v'le'enot, midavar sheno shelo, tizke v'tochal kimlo enea. He's going to be zochet to eat, just like everything that you could see. So therefore, because of that, right, what's going to happen is that everything is going to be with the eyes. So Rabbi Yosef Rav Chanina says, "Urtzon shechani seneh." What does that mean? עין שלו רצתה ליהנות מדבר שאינו שלו, the wife of פוטיפר, תזכה ותאכל בין השנואים, which is basically between the קודשי משכן Shiloh, they're going to eat also the משכנות השבטים, which they hated him, which is שוכני שנא. So Tana, we learned in a Braita, ro'eh she'amru. What does that mean now, ro'eh? Right? So he says, kol she'ro'eh, ve'en davar mafsik. If you see it, and there's no pasek in the middle, there's no afsek. Amar le'Rabbi Shimon ben Elekim le'Rabbi Lazar, asbir alach, I'm going to explain to you, Kigon be'kinishtad, for example, the Bet Knesset of Ma'on, because there they used to see Shiloh, and there was not a afsek between them and Shiloh. So Amar Rav Papa says, ro'eh she'amru, lo ro'eh kulo. Not even, we're not talking about you have to see the entire thing. Even if you're only seeing part of it, right? That means the second that you see part of the Mishkan, that's already enough. You don't have to see the entire Mishkan. You see part of the Mishkan, right? One part of it, that's fine. So Rav Papa asks, Omed v'ro'eh, Yoshev ve'eno ro'eh. What happens if you stand up, you could see it. But if you sit down, you cannot see it. What's halacha? So he says, by Rabbi Yirmiyah comes and he says, Omed al gabe anachal, right? V'ro'eh, or betoch anachal ve'eno ro'eh mai. What happens if a person is going to be Omed al gabe anachal, right? Which is, again, he's going to be on the nachal, right? V'ro'eh, and he sees Shiloh. Or he's going to be sitting betoch anachal, ve'eno ro'eh, and he does not see it. What's halacha? Teiku. We don't have an answer for these questions, okay? Because at the end of the day, you've got the standing yes and the sitting no, so we don't have an answer. Rabbi. So Kiata Rav Dimi, 1 minute. He says Kiata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came and he said, right, Bishlosha mekomot sharta shechina al Yisrael. There were 3 different places where there was shechina in Israel: Beshilo, Nov, and Givon. Okay, so you've got these 3 different places: Shiloh, Nov, and Givon. Ubet Olamim, right, and the Bet Olamim. So he says. Uvkulan lo sharta ele bechelek binyamin. But all of them are going to be in chelek binyamin. Shneimar chofef alav kol hayom. What does that mean? Kol chafifot lo yu ela chelko shel binyamin. All the chafifot of the Shechina is only going to be in the chelek of binyamin. Ki azi l'Abaye amra kamed Rav Yosef. So when Abaye came, he said to Rav Yosef, Amar chad bra lo havi havale lekayli v'lo mitakan. He says one child is going to be he says here lekailel taviv shel Abaye. He says venu metukan. He says I don't understand. It's not true. V'aktiv etzrotev v'yitosh mishkan. Sorry, mishkan Shiloh. What does that mean? Uchtiv etzrotev v'yimas b'ol Yosef v'shavet Ephraim lo bachar. So it's mefurash that it wasn't only in. It was going to be in Ephraim and not Binyamin. Meaning, when it says v'yimas b'ol Yosef v'shavet Ephraim lo bachar. So who's it going to be the ikarim? Right? It's going to be Shevet Ephraim. It's going to be in of Yosef. Ephraim is the child of Yosef, not of Binyamin. Sam Ravada says, Mike Kashele, what's the question? Dinma Shechina bechelek Binyamin. The Sanedre Gdola was going to be in Chelek Yosef. Maybe the Shechina was going to be in Chelek Binyamin, but the Sanedrin was going to be in Chelek of Yosef. So he says, since we found in the Bet HaMikdash the Shechina becheleko shel Binyamin, the Sanedrin bechelek Yehuda. Just like it was in the Bet HaMikdash. In the Bet HaMikdash, the chelek of the Sanhedrin was in Yehuda, right? The Lishkat HaGazit and all this. But the Shechina was in the chelek of Binyamin. So Elmaleh comes and he tells him, Hachi Asha, can you compare both cases? Hatam over there in the Bet HaMikdash, Mikarva Nachalot Gabe Adade. The Nachalot of Binyamin and Yehuda were one right beside each other. Hacha, but over here, Mimekarvan, were they beside each other? Obviously not. Hachana Mimekarvan, he says, they are together. Kedam Rav Chama Rabbi Chanina, just like as Rabbi Chama Rav Chanina comes and he says, Retzua ita yotze mechelko shel Yehuda. There was a retzua coming out from the chelek of Yehuda, v'nichnes lechelko shel Binyamin, v'uba haya banu mizbeach banui, and the mizbeach was there. V'haya Binyamin HaTzadik mitzayir alei al-bola, and Binyamin HaTzadik wanted always to take it for himself. V'chanami, and so to here, retzua ita yotze mechelko shel Yosef lechelko shel Binyamin, v'hainu dichtiv, and that's what it says, Tanat Shiloh. So you're right, it's the exact same thing, meaning, there was a little tiny chelek coming out, and that's where the Sanhedrin were. But everything else, the Shekhinah in itself, was going to be in the chelek of Binyamin. So you see again, it's going to be the same thing. So answers the Gemara, you're right. It's machloket tanaim, ketanai. Why? It says chofef alav kol hayom, right? When it says chofef alav, ze migdash rishon. Kol hayom ze migdash sheni. Ben ketefav shachen, that's Yemot HaMashiach. Which means that also it's going to be on the shevet of your phone, of Binyamin. Yeah. So he says, that means when the coming of the Mashiach, Rabbi Omer Rabbi says, Chofef alav is olam hazeh. Kol hayom is Yemot HaMashiach, uven ketvav shachen is Olam haba. So it comes out according to Shita of Rabbi, any place where there was Shechina ba'olam hazeh, whether it's going to be Shiloh, Nov, Givon, is always going to be in Chelek Binyamin. But according to Tanakama, right, it's only the Bet HaMikdash. Everything else was in the Chelek of Yosef. So Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Braita, Yemei Oel Moed Shebamidbar 40 Shana Chaser Achat. How long did they have the Oel Moed in the Midbar? So he says it was 40 years minus 1 day. Yeah? 40 years minus 1 year. Sorry. Yemei Oel Moed Shebagilgal. Right? How long do they have the Oel Moed? Makot. It's always the same. It's always 40 minus 1. It's always brought down like that. That's just, because they always used to speak about like a whole number, but really, Be'emet, it was always 39. So you remember, there was always a 39, whether it's going to be 39 makot, the 3 times the 13. It's always, huh? It's always the same. Whether it's going to be the melachot, makot, everything. It's always the same. So he says, Yemei el Moed Shebagilgal was 14, right? Sheva shekivshu v'sheva shechilku. So one more time. The Gilgal you had 14 years. Yemei shebemo Nov v'Givon was 57, was going to be 57 years. Nishtayru l'Shilo, so it comes out that you have for Shiloh, 370, it was 370, chaser achat, minus 1. Right? So it's always going to be, right, 369, right, which is 370 minus 1. Right? By the way, you should know, I think even Lavdil Elef Avdalot, I think even in many different languages, you have the same thing. Right? For example, if I'm going to tell you now it's 5 to 3 o'clock p.m., what do you say? Le 13 heures moins 5. Correct or not? So same thing. You're always, what you're doing is that you're taking the higher number and you're just saying I'm minus 1. Instead of saying 369, I say 370 minus 1. You understand that you're always going to the... Exactly. That's just the way in the language is how they use it. It's the same thing. That's what we said right now. We just did it again with the 369. Because you just said you had
40 days in the went up. We don't say 41 minus 1.
No, because the whole number is 40. You understand? The whole number is 40. But if it was going to be 39, you say 40 minus 1. You understand? So here again, one more time. We're talking about the different mishkans. You've got 14 years in the Gilgal, 57 years Nov and Givon, and 369 for how do you call this one? For Shiloh. Okay? So he comes and he says, right, which basically makes the 480. Okay? Remember, one from Yitziat Mitzrayim until the construction of the Bet HaMikdash, you had 480 years. Okay, 480. So how do you get the 480? You got 40 years in the desert, right? You've got 14 in the Gilgal, 57 in Givon, 369 in Shiloh, and therefore that's what's going to come out to the 480.
But it's supposed to be 479 because it said not 40.
No, it's 480. 480. Which one? 369 in Shiloh. 369. Okay? What? Where did you say that? There's the Ol Moed, right? Yes. So one second. So he says like this. How do you know? Minalan. Tamar More says, Shana Rishona asa Moshe et Mishkan. Shniya hukam Mishkan v'shalach Moshe meraglim. He says the first year after Yetziat Mitzrayim, they already did the Mishkan. However, though the second year was hukam Mishkan, and they went and they sent the meraglim. Right? He says Shebagilgal 14. Right? What does it mean now? Gilgal 14. Sheva shekivshu v'sheva shechilku. 7 years for the kibush aretz and 7 years for the distribution of the land. Right? Remember, it was 14 years the conquering. Right? Because it was 7 for conquering and 7 for the distribution. Menalan, how do we know? The Kama Kalev, because Kalev came and he said, Ben 40 shana anochi b'shloach Moshe v'ed Hashem et right otim mikadesh barnea leragel et haaretz v'ashev oto davar kashenim levavi. So he was 40 years old when he was sent to be a spy. וכתיב it's written, ועתה הנה אנוכי היום בן 85 שנה, that I'm going to be what? 85 years old. See, קברי לירדן, when he passed by the Yarden, בר כמה אבי? בר 70 ותמנה, so he was 78. וכמה, and he says, בן 85 שנה, it's 85. So therefore it comes out that what? That it took 7 years for the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. Right? Again, if he's 40 years old, and then they were decreed that they had another 40 years in the desert, right? So what happens? So he comes and he says, so what happens is that it's going to be now 80, but he's 85 over here. So he says what happened is that you had 7 years that they were conquering the land of Eretz Yisrael. So he says, V'sheva shechilku minalan. Fine, that's going to be 7 years for the conquering. How about 7 years for the dividing? He says, says, listen, if it took them 7 years for the conquering, it took them 7 years for the distribution. If you want, you could say, since you didn't find it, right? It says, it was 14 years after the city was hit. So therefore, that's how they know that it was 14 years as a total. So if it only took 7 years for the kivush, so it took 7 years also for the distribution as well. Oil Moed and Novin Givon was 57 years. How do you know? Tichtiv, as it says, Vahi, Kaskirot Aron Elokim, Vetana Keshemet Eli, when Eli passed away, right? He says, Eli Kohen, Charva Shiloh, Shiloh was destroyed. Ubau Lenov, they came to Nov. Keshemet Shmuel Aramati, when Shmuel Aramati passed away, Charva Nov, right? Nov was destroyed. Ubau LeGivon, and then they came to Givon and they made the Mishkan over there. So it comes out, and there it was going to be until the Bet HaMikdash. So it comes out that Noven Givon was from the time that Nishba Haaron through the Plishtim until the Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. So if you're going to divide that time, it's going to come out as follows. Uchtiv, Vayhi miyom shevet Haaron b'Kiryat Yarim v'yirbu yamim v'yi right 20 shana. ויינהו כל בית ישראל אחרי השם. הני 20 שנה, 10 שנה שמלך שמואל בעצמו, ושנה שמלך שמואל ושאול יחדיו, ושתיים שמלך שאול ושבע, right, the David, and 7 years of David HaMelech. So therefore it comes out that those were the 20 years that the Aaron was in Kiryat Ye'arim. Okay, 10 years of Shmuel, 1 year of Shmuel with Shaul, 2 years of Shaul. Shaul was the king for 2 years only, right? Then 7 years of David, because remember, that means even though David HaMelech did 40 years, for the first 7 years he was only Melech Yehuda. He was not Melech over all of Israel. Okay? Dichtiv, it says in a pasuk, "Vayamim Hashem malach David al Yisrael." We're on the top of Kuf Yutet Amud Aleph. Vayamim Hashem malach David al Yisrael 40 shana bechevron melech sheva shanim. So therefore, that's how you get the 7 years, and then you had the 40 years in total. So it was 33 that he was right over everything. By Shlomo Melech, it's written, "Vayachel livno b'shnat arba lemalchuto," that he actually started it in the 4th year of his malchut. So therefore, what happens is if you do 4 years plus 33 of David plus 20 of everybody, because the 20 you had 10 of Shaul, not Shaul, 10 of Shemuel and Avi. Then you had 1 year of Shaul and Shemuel. Then you had 2 years of Shaul, and then you had 7 years of David. So that's 20. So if you have 20 plus the 33 of David over all of Melech Yisrael, plus 4 of Shlomo Melech that he was a king, so you're going to have 57. So therefore it comes out Nishtairu l'Shilo. So how much is left over for Shiloh then? Because if you have 480 minus 111, how did you get 111? 40 in the desert, plus 14, right, which was the conquering and the distribution of Eretz Yisrael, right, which was going to be in the Gilgal. And then you had 57, which is going to be Nov Givon, so it's 111. So 480 minus 111 is going to be what? For Shiloh, 369, which is going to be the 370, right, minus, wow. Okay.